Hi everyone and welcome. We have here a bag of cantaloupe rinds, chopped up small so I can feed them to my little pink bins that I have down there that have night crawlers in them. But before we do that, I've got my gloves on here so that I can take a quick peek at my two oldest bins. One of my bins actually turned into my oldest bin ever a few days ago. This bin's now at 197 days old. And it was about 8 days ago that I last scooped out a whole bunch of worms after setting up this horizontal migration. And I had reset this feeding zone in the hopes that it might be a final wave of depopulating the compost. So my hope is that maybe in 2 days, maybe at the point when these bins reach at least this bin reaches its 199th day of age, I can maybe scoop out the compost and consider the bin as done, and at that point relocate these worms into a new habitat. So my method for determining if this was something that I can in fact do in the next couple days was to poke around down here right at the very edge of the feeding zone, because last time we were in here we'd already examined the rest of the material, and the only place we saw worms was right here on the very edge where the food, right on the boundary of where the food was. Back here we'd already determined that there was really no worms at all, which was what we were after all. And you know what? I'm looking at this material, and granted I'm finding a worm or two, and I might as well help them get to the other side at this point if I encounter them. But I'm really not seeing many at all. And I'm thinking that given a couple more days, these worms should hopefully also come to the realization that the material that they're inhabiting is pretty much depleted of any food, and that it's time to go roaming around to find some new source of nourishment. So this is precisely what we were after, and I was just trying to determine if possibly 2 days from now, on day 199 of this bin's age, before it reaches the age of 200, that I can harvest these castings, and the bonus being that I could do so without needing to sift the material out and separate the worms and use light and all this other baloney. So this horizontal migration seems to be doing the trick. Let's take a peek in here too. Let's see how things are progressing in here. This bin is not quite as mature as my oldest bin. It's about 30 days younger, 29 days younger as far as I remember. And I think we've got a few more inhabitants of this material than the bin we just looked at. So I think that tells me this bin might require a little bit more time to get to that stage. Possibly even, scooping out the bin one more time and reloading this feeding zone before being able to harvest these castings. So that's awesome. I think in a couple days we're going to be harvesting this bin. So yeah, just wanted to do a quick check on that before we get over to feeding the two nightcrawler bins that are in the pink pots. Let's get this camera up on the bench and let's bring over the pink pots so we can feed them. Going to bring them both up here at the same time, and these are the European night crawlers and these are the African night crawlers. This bin was started with 100 cocoons and this one was started with 500 cocoons. You can tell just from looking at the level, try to hold them evenly. This one's a little bit taller, so I've been trying to maintain this one as a larger environment with the assumption that there's more worms in it that need more space and whatnot, more food, everything else. And well, here's something that's going on with these bins. I usually don't have drainage on my bins, but you can see that these bins, at least the European nightcrawler bin, is dumping out fluid, and that's the reason I've got catch trays beneath the shelf that these rest on. It's interesting. Somebody that I've been chatting with back and forth on YouTube even made reference to the fact that They're fond of the way I manage my bins in a way that sort of avoids excess moisture, and this sort of messy stuff is precisely the reason why we want to try to avoid it. All right, it'll have to do. So hopefully it's not going to continue spewing too much liquid out. I could see it's already leaving a little puddle over there on this other piece of paper, but doesn't matter. We're going to try to make do as is. Let's just bring the camera over a little bit closer to be able to peek down into the bin to see how things are progressing as I feed. This is the larger of the two bins. This is the European nightcrawler bin, and like we've done in the past, I'm going to use my little yellow basin here to as a temporary holding pen for the leaf cover that I have on top of my worms. It's going to do just fine as leaf cover after the feeding, so I just want to get it out of my way so it's not an obstacle or an impedance to getting this feeding done efficiently. Now, it's been 8 days since we last tended to these bins with food, and I believe I was just sending the food right down the middle. So that's where we should find any traces of leftover food, if there is any, and I think I see little scraps of what appears to be green stuff. Usually if it's not brown, if it's green or some other color, then that's likely a sign that that's leftovers that they've not yet gotten to. So can definitely see a few pretty good sized worms growing in here. They're starting to make their way to maturity. It's probably worth a quick peek at the bottom too, just to see what the moisture levels look like, because there is water dripping out, and I'm glad there is drainage, because it wouldn't do the worms at the very bottom any good if it was standing water. So there are worms at the very bottom, doing just fine, so there's nothing to worry about here as far as I can tell. Before I drop in the food though, I'm going to just take a little pinch of this leafy matter that I extracted earlier, just to lay it down as bedding underneath. And I'm going to take about half of the, maybe a little bit more than half of the melon rinds that I've got here, and just plop it right in there. It's a good, generous feeding, and it's the type of food that they're going to really enjoy, so it shouldn't last long. One more for good measure, and before we cap it off, I'm going to also include one of my standard feeding staples, which is the used coffee grinds. I think it's a good thing because it sort of covers up that sweet smell of the fruit and prevents the infiltration of the bin by insects that would be drawn to that sweet smelling aroma of the fruit. So I like what I'm seeing here. European nightcrawlers look like they're coming along pretty good. Just going to cover up here, and then we'll pull out the African nightcrawlers. You can see a little flying insect here and there, so they are finding their way to the food that was intended for the worms. So that's part of the reason I attempt to shelter the food with a lot of leaf cover like so, and bury it if possible. So same thing here, we're just going to grab my little yellow holding box here and extract the leaf cover temporarily so we can do this efficiently. It's not the best containers to use, but since these were relatively small populations, I didn't want to have too big of a bin yet. I wanted to be able to see them instead of having them just scattered all over a large space in a larger bin. So these African nightcrawlers are probably fewer in numbers, since there weren't as many when I started this bin. But I like what I'm seeing here too, because in the past I've always been noticing that their sizes were pretty tiny, and And I believe it might have been because of the very small containers in which they were growing up. So this is a slightly larger habitat than what they had occupied previously. And what they were occupying previously was the time-lapse nursery that I had shot video of over the course of 70 days. That's a really interesting video to watch these little guys emerge from their cocoons and start right into their life cycle of eating to grow. And I would think that at this point, after I don't know how many days now, that these little guys are probably mature enough that they're possibly, hopefully, reproducing already. So the one thing I am noticing about these nightcrawlers every time I come in here to feed them is that they really like to crawl up the walls of the bin. You can see one of them right here trying to crawl up instead of being dissuaded by the bright lights overhead. He's just heading right up there, up onto the dry material, into the bright light. So I'll usually try to set them straight and send them back down to where they belong. So, all right, well, this is mainly what I had come down here to do today, so it's not a very long maintenance visit. It's really just a quick check-in on my my horizontal migrations that are close to being done with their wind down. And it was just the need to get some more food into these bins since it's been 8 days, and as you can see, whatever food that they had previously is all gone. So hopefully this is a generous enough feeding to hold them off for another week or 10 days. So yeah, I think we're in pretty good shape here. Let's get this thing all covered back up and back on the shelf. But that's not very interesting, so why don't we conclude the video at that. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, then I always really appreciate a quick thumbs up just to show that you liked the video and to show your support. And you know, if you're into this sort of material, then always consider becoming subscribed to the channel as well, because there's always new stuff coming online, and by being a subscriber and even by ringing the bell, you're almost guaranteed to get notification about new stuff coming online, so you can catch it when it's newly published. Alright everyone, thanks so much for watching, and hopefully we'll see you back again here next time. Have a great day. Bye now.